Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and I am back with the second part of my thoughts on the September balance patch rotation, however you want to talk about it. So, first of all, I am, as ever, a Kards Content Creator, member of the Kards Contributor Program. I do, if you're around this channel, if you're new to this channel, you'll explore and find that it's true, but I do an awful lot of content based on new players, and a lot of what I do is concentrated on trying to make sense of the game for people so they can understand what's going on. Obviously, when it comes to stuff like balance patches and changes, that can get a little bit more detailed. I did one video previously, link down below, on the changes that we are seeing to cards that are returning from the reserve pool. So, as usual, just in case people aren't familiar with how things work, in cards, the way that rotation and balance works is that they use something called a reserve pool. So, cards are never completely removed from the game. Rather, they are sent into the reserve pool and hang out there until they're brought back, so that you keep a healthy amount of cards live in play, but not too many. And at the moment, the new thing from 1939, and one that I've been really enjoying, is that as they bring cards back from the reserve pool, they're changing them. And that's very cool. In this particular case, we've had quite a few come back. We had 3 for every main nation, and then 1 for each of the allied nations, barring Finland, because Finland's a new ally and has no cards in the reserve pool. So you can go check out my video to see my thoughts on that. You can also check out J King 7's video. He's done some thoughts on it as well. I'll probably put a link to that down below as well, because I think it's sometimes useful to get different perspectives. There are times at which J King and I do have very similar opinions. There are also times at which we look at things differently. J King is I think, a more actively competitive player than I am. I am generally accepted to be quite skilled, but I choose not to climb ladder and compete for the OCC and competitions because I don't have the time to put in for the ladder climb, and I focus my content, as I say, on new players and players who are getting into the game, which means that I may approach some of these changes, spoilers, differently, because I'm looking at them from a different perspective and from the feedback that I get. If you find this stuff interesting, please do like, subscribe, all of that. I know it's at the beginning and the end of the video, but it really does help the metrics and me be able to keep this going. This might be relatively long. It could get rambly. So what I will say is that with the card changes, like the returns from the reserve pool, we've seen some fairly impactful cards that have come back and are going to be interesting to see and play. That's pretty cool, actually. I'm quite excited to see how that goes, and you can see my thoughts there. These changes, the actual balance changes, which are changes to the text or function of a card, sometimes buff, sometimes nerf, sometimes just text changes. In this particular article, we get all of the above. These are very much more nuanced this time. There's quite a lot of small impact, in my opinion, from some of these changes, and just awareness and cleaning up. So I'll try and explain, particularly with some of them, why they're even remotely relevant, in my opinion. Anyway, rather than rambling on endlessly, I will cut to the cool part, so let's go and actually dig into the article. Okay, so here it is. This is the balance patch article that we have received. I'm going to start, as I usually do, by reading the preamble and giving you my opinions on that preamble and the way that it comes across and how I think this goes. So let's see what we had to say. So, the September 2024 balance patch changes. Hello friends. On the whole, the meta is pretty much in a healthy place. There are no dominating decks and many different archetypes thrive. I have a feeling this is the ancient art of burying the hard part in the title, because there are probably a number of members of the community, certainly at certain levels of play, who might disagree with that statement. There are some relatively predominant decks at certain parts of the game. I will say, actually, at the upper end, from the point of view of a competitive meta, actually, I've been seeing quite a lot of different variation. But I do know that lots of people have been mentioning that there are certain things they are seeing a lot of, and we'll get to those later because they are being addressed. But anyway, it's there, and I do think we're headed in roughly the right direction. But we'll see. Anyway, so next we get, nevertheless, there is room for improvement. The retribution mechanic continues to polarise the player base, plus it hurts the validity of various other decks. So, yeah, I've spoken a lot about this in the past, so I'll try and give you the too long didn't listen / watch / read. You can find more information in various other videos where I talk about this mechanic. I'm not a fan. So Retribution is a new mechanic whereby certain cards trigger and develop an order called Outrage, which allows you to play that order and then select Develop. It's the new mechanic where you see 3 cards and pick one to add to your hand from a pool, in this case of 12 cards. A number of these 12 cards are incredibly powerful. Almost all of them are really good value, and several of them are frankly cracked. And this mechanic, combined with some of the other things that affects with it, has become quite predominant as a way of playing because it gives, in my opinion, particularly at lower levels and on the rank climb to Field Marshal, stuff like that, it makes for a deck that is very forgiving and allows you to have a lot of get-out-of-jail-free cards and play back from almost unwinnable positions, and it is indeed polarising the player base. There are a number of us who have said from the beginning that we weren't sure about this, and it got messy, and we'll see where it goes after this. But anyway, yes, I agree, it is there. Glad to see it being acknowledged. Interested to see what they've done with it. Next, we have one of the new kids on the block, the French mill deck. Firstly, this is not a new kid on the block, it's just a new thing that's being played, but I get the point. Has also become slightly too big for its britches and needs a slight adjustment. Yeah, it does. Mill is always going to be a very polarising mechanic. So for those who are newer to card games, if you are, Mill is any deck which functions by causing you, the opposition, to discard cards from your deck. In the case of cards, there is a system called Fatigue. If you need to draw a card, and there is not one in your deck, you take damage. The first time you take 1 point of damage, the second time you take 2 points of damage, the third time you take 3, and so on. So it's exponential damage. Mill works by delaying the game to the point whereby there are very few cards in deck, and using cards which force you to fill your hand up and then draw cards, thus overdrawing and discarding cards, so that you get to fatigue faster, thus creating a gap in deck size which increases the speed at which exponential damage kills you. It is a number of things. Firstly, it's not easy to play. Anyone who says it's easy to play has not played enough of it, but it is strong if you play it well, and it is definitely frustrating to play into when it's played well, because it's an incredibly unfun thing to find everything on the board either being destroyed or sent back to hand or pinned, and then other cards being milled out of your hand. So not only do you have a game in which you can't do anything, but it's a game that lasts a very long time in which you can't do anything. This is really frustrating. It's not a mechanic that's ever gone down brilliantly well in any card game that I've played, and over 30 plus years I have played a lot of CCGs. So I am kind of glad to see that we're going to be trying to address Mill, because yes, it's an issue. The reason that Mill is an issue is partly, and only partly, the fact that at the last Officer Club Championship, the winner of the Officer Club Championship brought 3 decks, all of which ran France as an ally and were Mill decks with different mate nations. And it worked. And I've talked before about why I think this was a really ingenious thing to do, and the right call into the meta, because Mill was very strong against heavy, slow ramp decks, which were going to be the big thing that were in it. I cover this more talking about other stuff in other videos, so no point going over it here. But anyway, Mill is a thing. I'm glad to see that we're looking at it. I'm fascinated to see the choices that we make. Finally, we have, and as always, we round out things with a few key buffs to help support or enable new decks. And then we get a little paragraph at the end which says, but before we go into details of cards receiving nerfs and buffs, let's start with some text updates on a few cards. These are not intended to strengthen or weaken cards as such, and more just to align them better with the current technical capabilities and future changes. So let's take a look. So this is interesting. There are timestamps. If this isn't interesting to you and it gets boring, you can skip. But this to me is interesting design stuff, because this is where we get cleanup, which as a designer, and I have done some design work in various forms of tabletop gaming, We like cleanup because cleanup lets us tidy older cards or wording that was a bit clunky to make it align better with the way that we want the game to play, and that appears to be where we're going. So we're going to skip down and take a look at the first card that's been changed in this way. I think there are 2 of them, but you'll see, and as I say, there are timestamps. So, let's go. Right, so the first card that is being tidied up is Uprising. So Uprising is a Polish order. It's been around forever, and it was a 5-cost order. It's a special card. You can run 2 of them, and it says deal damage to target unit and all other units equal to the Polish units destroyed in this battle. It's a really effective board clear. It does have a downside because, of course, it damages your units too. But this is a staple in Legion's decks as a board reset. It's a very good card, it's very well costed, it does everything right. So why then, Bear, would we be changing anything? And this is where we get to the noodle of just cleanup, so let's go and look at the cleanup. So the cleanup here is the card now is identical except for the fact that the text now reads deal damage to all units equal to Polish units destroyed this battle. So, 1... the function, the result, is the same, kind of. This is actually a tiny buff, because the previous version required you to have a unit on board to target. Now, the odds are you're never going to play this, targeting a unit, but in the edge case that you have one of the big units that says cannot be targeted by enemy orders as the only thing on the board, and you have a Uprising that could destroy it, that doesn't hard counter Uprising anymore. So it's something to be aware of if you're playing into a Poland Legions deck, is that Uprising now can fire even if you have an immune unit on the board, because just because it can't be targeted, this is now a non-targeted order. But it's not a non-targeted order for the purposes of buff. It didn't really need the buff, and it isn't really going to change that much, because those were very edge case situations. The reason this text is changing is that 1939 now have better technology. When you look at certain cards in your hand, Diplomatic Attaché in Japan is a very good example of this. If it has an effect that triggers, like is increased or numerically relevant to something that's already happened in the game, you'll now get a little bracketed number at the end of the card that shows you the value. This will now appear on Uprising, which means that Uprising doesn't need the target unit, because the main reason for the target unit, at least from the point of view of someone who played quite a lot of Legions, particularly Japan-Poland Legions, one of the things this was great for was me being able to figure out how much damage was actually being dealt by just hovering over units. Now I don't have to. It is just a quality of life improvement, and a good one. Honestly, it's not going to make a major difference to anything, but it's a nice little tidy up. And I'm kind of cool with this. This is the kind of just bookkeeping and housekeeping that I really enjoy. I think it's good to see that you stay on top of it and tidy it up. So on the whole, let's start with just well done 1939 for just being sensible and tidying this up and not being afraid to give it a tiny little buff at the same time. Certainly it's nice now that I can't just be hard countered by someone dropping a German tank that's immune to orders and then not playing other units and trying to smack it. Not that you can't play around that, but it's nice that I can now just remove it with Uprising. Anyway, let's move on to the next card. Okay, so I want to get something out of the way before I go any further, because the card appearing on screen is going to make lots of people go, ah! So this is Feigned Retreat. Feigned Retreat used to be a staple in certain decks and a very powerful card. To be clear, Feigned Retreat is still in the reserve pool. It is not coming back in this patch to main play. This change is going to affect the card because the card is still playable in Classic. But that's the only time you're going to see this. Classic, or perhaps I suppose if you're playing in a friendly match, or you're bringing cards into some format that allows you to play reserved cards. Anyway, we'll get to that, but I just want to be very, very clear. Feigned Retreat is not coming back, but it is getting a change, and it is a sensible one, so let's go. Feigned Retreat is a 6-cost order. It's in Japanese Elite, and it says, discard your hand. When you deploy a unit this battle, draw a card. So it's a draw engine. You discard your hand, but you get a draw engine for the rest of the battle, and this has been in the past very, very powerful, because this is a very, very potent effect. I would not expect us to see Feigned Retreat in its current form back in the game, but you never know. There are different draw engines and stuff out there anyway. Anyway, so the change is this is really just noodle and tidying. So this is, the card now reads, discard your hand, your HQ gets, when you deploy a unit this battle, draw a card. Now, here's the thing, this is kind of interesting on lots of different levels. Firstly, why would it matter? The main reason it matters is when you're playing the game, sometimes you will notice a little gear next to the opponent's HQ or your HQ. If you click on it, it will show you active effects, like battle-changing effects that are in play. Because technically, that's where they're located. Now, this is explicitly stated. They are buffs to your HQ. Which is interesting. If HQs can ever do anything other than just sit there and be hit point pools, which is a design space I personally think would be interesting but difficult to explore. Not going to get into that might be a video in and of itself, but this would mean that, hypothetically, you would be able to target effects on enemy HQs now, because they're now explicitly connected to the HQ. But at the moment, what it really is just good, sensible signposting for newer players who are trying to figure out, where do I need to look to see battle-changing effects? Well, when you read the cards now, it's very clear where they're located. They're located on the relevant player's HQ, whether that's yours or your opponent's. And this just brings it in line with other cards that have similar effects. No worries, like it. I'm pretty chill. Good cleanup. Next card. Contest Doctrine. Here's Contest Doctrine. I'm not going to talk about the card. It's not getting any changes, so it's not relevant. This is part of the Blitz Doctrine, Contest Doctrine package, and I'm going to keep this simple. This is exactly the same as the previous change that I talked about. This is just changing the text of the card to, instead of saying tanks you deploy this battle get +1/+1, it gets your HQ gets tanks you deploy this battle get +1/+1. The effect is identical, nothing has changed, it's just cleaning up the text again, and I thoroughly approve. Absolutely fine, perfectly sensible, bring the text in line. I will always be a fan of clarity of text. I'm also a fan of timing charts being available in card games, which I kind of wish they were in this game, but that's a different conversation to have with 1939 at some point. Hey, you never know, you might see it in suggestions. But this is pretty cool. It's just this is just yet more bookkeeping changes, and I'm good with that. Moving on. Okay, so we've arrived at the cards that are actually getting changes, and we're starting with nerfs. So the first card on the block is Yank. This is so hilarious to me. This is insanely funny to me for 100 different reasons, and I'm trying not to get too I told you so about this. Yank has already been changed once. It's now being changed again. So, Yank used to be a 6-cost, this is not even on the screen, the original Yank was a 6-cost order that said, whenever you develop a card, also develop a Retribution. And this card saw lots of play because it meant that the Retribution pool was even more accessible, because anytime you were developing any card, including a Retribution developed from the Outrage that you get from other Retribution triggers, you got a bonus Retribution, and if you then played Develop 2 Retributions, which, believe it or not, is a card you can get from the Retribution pool, which we'll talk about in a minute, you would get 4. This was insane, and many of us, myself and some other prominent players, wanted to see some changes to Retribution, and we did see some. One of the first ones of which was that Yank was changed to, this battle, the first time you develop a card each turn, also develop a Retribution, so it can only trigger once. Apparently, that's not enough. I was very happy with this. In fact, if you go back and check the videos, this is the exact nerf, the original nerf, is the exact nerf I suggested, because it made Yank fine. It was expensive, it was clunky, it had a decent effect, but you really had to invest to get it. Wasn't a major problem. To be clear, since that time, since the change, Retribution has still been a polarising thing. We talked about this earlier in the intro, and it's still causing issues, but Yank isn't the issue. In fact, if you talk to a lot of players who talk about playing Retribution, particularly in the Chinese community, who I'm lucky enough to have some contact with, about playing Retribution at the upper levels of ladder and competitively, quite a lot of them don't run Yank. Anyway, for reasons surpassing understanding, the devs have decided... I don't often say this, by the way, and I really want to be clear about this. I love 1939. I love your games. My door is always open to anything I can help you with. I will keep promoting this game because I believe in its potential. But this change baffles me. For reasons surpassing understanding, the continued proliferation of Retribution and the fact that people are really annoyed at how much of a particularly difficult thing it is to deal with when you're not an upper tier player. And I need to be clear about this, and I think J. King talks about this in his video too, and I agree with him. Retribution is not that bad to deal with if you are a top player, playing certain kinds of decks and you understand what's going on. As long as you are concentrated and focused in play, it's not that you can play around it, you can deal with it, it's not unbeatable, it's just annoying. The reason, however, that this is a problem is that lower down it is an overwhelming mechanic, because it gives a huge toolbox to the player who's getting Retribution that makes it feel like there's nothing you can do that has any significance because they always have an answer. It's only seeing play, largely, at any heavyweight in US main ramp decks. This is important because ramp decks, for those who don't know, are decks that use acceleration mechanics to get more available credit slots. It is not unusual to get late in the game and have a ramp deck that has 15, 16, 17 or even more credits a turn to spend. So, to be clear, cost isn't the issue for a ramp deck. Ramp decks don't care about cost. They have excess credits. However, with this continuing to cause consternation and many suggestion posts and comments and things and various social media saying, please do something about this, nerf it, this is a problem, for reasons surpassing understanding, we have concluded that the solution to this, somehow, is to make Yank cost 1 more credit. I mean, if you want Retribution, or at least Yank, not to be played, GG, this card is borderline unplayable now at 7 credits. It was hard enough, as I say, for top players to justify the juice being worth the squeeze at 6 credits. At 7 credits, this is just insane. I don't understand this change. I don't particularly think it's vastly impactful because, as I say, at lower levels, for those of you who are climbing the ranks, this might be a relief because you're going to see a lot less of Yank and more Retribution spam, but realistically, there'll still be some heavy ramp decks that run this because they still see the value in it, but at a certain point you will realise this is just, it's not worth the so. There are better things to do with 7 credits, even in a ramp Retribution deck. Anyway, I mean, you're 1 credit short of being able to use production order and drop a bomber. Anyway, I'm going to move on because there's not a lot to say about this, and we are going to get to another Retribution change. Spoilers. And you'll get even more of my thoughts. But this isn't... I'm not going to say it's a bad change or a good change. It's just... I don't get it. I just don't get it. Anyway, moving on. So, Retribution, in our healthy meta, is so much of an issue still, and so polarising in the player base, that it's eating not 1 but 2 nerfs. I'm going to get to why they're both not going to help in a minute. But the second nerf is to Outrage. Outrage is not a playable card. It is a token, a card that is generated by cards that have things like, when this unit dies, add an Outrage to your hand. Outrage then develops a Retribution. 1 cost order, you play it, and you see 3 Retribution cards and pick one. Or if you've triggered Yank somehow nowadays, you see 3, pick one, then see another 3, and pick one. That's how Retribution works. Always has been, always will. This change has been talked about in the past, and it's interesting because the change is very simple. Instead of now costing 1, this now costs 2 credits. There is a problem with this change, which is this is cleaning the water up off the floor, not turning off the point of the leak. This is addressing the flood, not the leak. The problem, and I will say this endlessly, with Retribution has been and is not the actual mechanic, it's the pool it plays into. The pool is too strong. I'll say that again, I've said it endlessly, you can watch other videos in which I say this. If you're 1939, please go watch them. In fact, I might end up doing yet another one on this. The pool is too strong. There are cards in there that shouldn't exist. Retribution, developed 2 Retributions, should not exist. It shouldn't be nerfed. It shouldn't be changed. It doesn't need alteration. It just needs to be removed from the game. It's silly. Having a card created by another card, created by the death of a card, that creates 2 cards, which can trigger a card, which then causes it to create a 3rd card. I'm sorry, just listen to that sentence and you get how ridiculous that is. Pointless. A lot of the targeted cards in there are too cheap. You could just make those more expensive, which I know you think you're kind of doing this, but you're not. Because the only deck that is going to continue to care about Retribution at this point is Pure Ramp. Pure Ramp does not care that Outrage costs 1 more credit. So what? I had excess credits anyway. We'll see if these changes combined are enough to slow the roll of this, but I think they're actually more likely to kill the archetype completely if they keep going in this direction than make it manageable and playable. Maybe that's the intent. Maybe they're just looking at Retribution and going, I so wish we'd never done this. Heaven knows, it's not like certain people in the past said this was a risky and possibly terrible idea. There's no video record of that anywhere at all. My point being, anyway, that was hubris, and I accept it, but I am passionate about this. As far as I can tell, the intent at this point is bordering on just trying to remove Retribution from the game without removing Retribution from the game. I mean, I know you don't. I know you have rotation protection, but really just write an article that says, oops, this was a mistake, and then remove it from the game, if that's the way you feel. You'd be surprised how well... In fact, if you want to see how well communities, particularly good-intentioned communities filled with decent people, which Cards does have quite a lot of, react to open development, go check out an RPG development company called MCDM and the huge success of their Kickstarter for a new RPG. And that's been driven entirely by the fact that they have open playtesting, videos about design, and talk openly about things that they get wrong without trying to hide them in flowery language and jokes and hopes of... They don't whitewash anything. They just open up. Maybe try it, see how it goes down. But anyway, that's a different conversation. This wraps up the net result, kind of, well, this kills Retribution changes. We're done with the changes to Retribution. We're not done with the changes to Ramp, which leads us on to the next change, which I've kind of talked about already, but we'll talk about again. The B24J. So, right, again, clarity from the beginning, this card cannot be included in your deck. You can only get this card by developing it through cards that create bombers. I know you can get it through production order because that's the way it was intended to work. I know you can get it through Bomber Mafia because I'm passionate about the fact that you shouldn't be able to. And you might be able to get it through Ingenuity, but I don't play Ingenuity enough to know whether you can or not, because production order exists. And Bomber Mafia. Anyway, this is a token bomber, effectively a created card. It is was a 7 cost, 3 op cost, 6/5 heavy armour bomber, which is not half bad. That's a good body. Granted, the op cost is high, but that's big bombers for you. And it had deployment. Suppress all enemy units. This card was cracked. This card is bonkers, it is silly, it is effectively a board reset without actually destroying units. It's incredibly potent in a game that often revolves around units that gain buffs. It's crippling to decks like Legions that do buffs, or US frontline decks that are dropping buffs onto their units, or I could actually go on to Mobilize if you're playing that. Alpine, this card is insane. Production Order has already seen some alterations and changes, it just needs to see more. The change, which I'm okay with, it's a decent beginning, I don't think it's enough, but it's good, is that now it is deployment, suppress target enemy unit and adjacent units. This is a good change. This is a very good change because it means there are ways to play around this. It is not just universally slap it down and watch your opponent cry into their beer. But I would like to see the body of the bomber changed. Because for this effect, the body that you're getting out of this is strong. It maybe needs... I mean, you could give it less defense, but I think that's kind of pointless. It's still kind of in some kind of removal range, and you'd have to really bring it down to put it into proper removal range. I think probably more accurately you want to think about adjusting the attack by a point or two, but I would like to see a further change to this, but I am glad to see that we have recognised the issue that is, because it's such a universally good card. The second thing that I would like to see, really passionately like to see, is this card to only be, and its cousin, the B24D, which by the way also needs a nerf, removed from everything but production order. Leave them in production order, where they live, get them out of the Bomber Mafia pool and the Ingenuity pool if they're in it. These are too good to be so easily available. The fact that a US deck will routinely be able to generate 4 of these in a battle is insane. Anyway, that's one of the changes I'd like to see, but I do celebrate and I'm quite happy with the fact that we've seen this change. This change is good. I'm happy to see this change. Right, move on to the next one. Right, from Ramp Retribution to Mill. This is the change to Mill. I know there are many people that will be excited to see what this is and find out whether I think it's a good change. I do. This is the only change we're seeing to Mill, which honestly surprises me. I expected Mill to get changed. Didn't expect this card to get changed. I expected Compromise to get changed because Compromise is still stupidly good. Compromise, by the way, is the 3-cost order that says either draw a card and your HQ gains 3 defense, or you and your opponent both draw 2 cards, gaining 3 HQ defense twice. So you get like 1 card and 3, and then 1 card and 3. It's an incredibly strong mill tool. But anyway, that's the card I expected to see a change. Honour and Loyalty being changed is fairly sensible. Honour and Loyalty is a very strong card. Honour and Loyalty is a 2-cost French order, and it says, shuffle target unit into its owner's deck, the owner then draws 2 cards. It's a standard card, which means you can run 4 of them, and this is incredibly good for forcing overdraw. You wait until your opponent has 8 or 9 cards in hand, or you use Phony War to give them 8 cards in hand, although usually you want to say Phony War to win the game, but this is not a video on how to play Mill well. Then you use this to take their big threat, throw it back into their deck, shuffle it, and then force them to get rid of a couple of cards, and then next turn overdraw another one. Played well, this can cause them to overdraw 2 or 3 cards. If you can play multiple of these, you can mill huge chunks of your opponent's deck, which is the point. The change. It's gone from 2-cost to 3-cost. It's a nuanced change. It's a balanced change. I think it's a good change. I think it's sensible. I don't know if it alone is going to be enough to slow mill down. It's good. It does slow mill down. And that will help. But I don't know if this is actually going to be enough on its own to actually remove mill as a major thing that we'll see. I think we're still going to see a fair chunk of mill played, because the one change is big. It does mean you can't have quite such massive mill turns, and that is a good thing. But I do think we could do with looking at compromise. Just a little bit, because it's rather good. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this as a change. I think it's quite sensible. We'll see how it plays. It's like, it does slow mill down. It is a significant mill nerf. Just went in a direction I didn't expect. Anyway, moving on. First responders. I have a face. This is the first buff that we see in this patch. And this is the face of why. Why? Why are we buffing this card? I'll get to why I think we are in a bit. Mostly because I think people are sleeping on this card, because there are other things going on and it just hasn't made its landing. But let's begin. First Responders is a recent addition in its current form to the game. It is a 4-cost countermeasure, and it says, at the end of the enemy turn, add a 5th Brigade, 5th Brigade is a 1/5 guard, to your support line with +1/+1 for each enemy unit. So you're guaranteed a 5th Brigade. It's probably going to have buffs, and you can run 4 of these. Why is this a good card, Bear? Because this card bypasses countermeasures' biggest problem. Countermeasures, generally speaking, are a risk-reward proposition, because to use a countermeasure you have to hold it up on your turn, paying the credits. If your opponent plays around it, or somehow doesn't trigger it, you have lost those credits, and then you have to pay them again to activate the countermeasure. First Responders might as well be in order. I mean, it's not because of the way the text works, but First Responders is, unless your opponent has Imperial Strength or something similar, a way to discard countermeasures, it's guaranteed to trigger. Now, that's really good. For whatever reason, and as I say, I suspect this is because this just hasn't seen a lot of play since it landed, and they were probably looking at this one, they saw it going, this is a really good card, it'll probably see play. I agree, by the way, it's expensive, but the more I reflect on this card, and my initial opinions were a little lukewarm on it, the more I realise that played well, this card could be really good. There are other people who do a better job of explaining how. Why are we now deciding to buff this? It's now 3, okay, at 3 credits, which is the new change, it's 1 credit cheaper. This is so good. So good. This is such a good turn 3 hold up. Because turn 3 is interesting, depending on where you are in pacing and tempo. Because in the right position, you play this card at a point when you know your opponent wants, especially if they're playing aggro, to go wide. At which point you get a massive unit guaranteed at the end of their turn. This is a good counter to aggro decks, and with the new cards coming for Britain that work around guards, hello Royal West Kents, this could be really fun. Expect to see this card see play. Psychic Bear says, expect to see this card changed back to its original cost, or otherwise nerfed at some point. Because if the Britain Guard archetype takes off, and it might, this card will be integral. It's really good. Don't sleep on this card also. If you play Britain, don't sleep on this card. If you're interested in making some Brit infantry like heavy guard control decks, really take a look at this. It's not half bad. And when this comes out at 3 cost, it gets a lot better. Right, anyway, that's First Responders, so we will move on to the next card. Right, it's a Soviet card, and there's a theme here. Once again, I am going to ask why. This change and the last one blindside me completely. I do not expect to see them. These were not things that I even thought might happen. So this is the 92nd Naval Brigade. This is a covert unit. For those who don't know, covert units, they all cost 3. When you play them face down. They stay face down until either they are attacked or you attack with them, or some other effect reveals them. That's how covert works. While they are face down, they can't be targeted by orders and they cannot be affected by countermeasures. The archetype is slow but very defensive. It's very hard to deal with if it can get in position. 92nd Naval Brigade is Soviet card. Soviets and US have good covert units. There are some Japan covert units, but realistically Soviet and US have good ones, and I'd argue the Soviets have the best core units. The US just have some interesting extras. Anyway, point being, 92nd Naval Brigade was a 3-cost, 1-op cost, 5/3 covert unit that has ambush. Ambush means it deals its damage first unless the opponent would survive that damage. So if your opponent has 5 or less defense, this just kills it and it takes no damage in return. It's quite potent. Ambush is very strong. If people can work their way around it, we might see some stuff about this. J-King had some fun with ambush on a stream recently. I've had some fun in the past. Ambush is interesting. Anyway, this card's pretty good. It does have a downside. It has reveal, lose 3 credits at the start of your next turn, so it kind of effectively costs 6 credits on a payment plan, but it's still pretty good. It has seen play. It is very tough to deal with because at 5 attack, this is your opponent needs to have something that can deal with it. Anyway, shifting across, we've decided to give this an extra point of defense to make this harder to deal with, to take it out of range of certain removal cards. I don't know why. I don't know why it needs the help. Maybe there is a feeling that Covert's not seeing a lot of play at the minute, and it isn't. Then it needs a buff. I don't think it does. What Covert needed was for the meta to change around it enough that Covert had time to actually do something. And I think we're getting there. People are starting to get some ideas about what they can do with Covert that is interesting and good. I don't know how long this change will last, because if you were going to change this card, there are other things you could have changed on it. I mean, I recognise that you can't change the cost because of the way Covert works, but I don't know, you could have changed the credit loss or something. Again, I don't know why this thing needs an extra point of defence. But we'll see. I don't know how meaningful a change it is, but this thing is just slightly more of an awkward pain to deal with. And it was already quite an awkward pain to deal with. Still, I'm always pro anything that buffs Soviets, though, because at the minute they really don't get a lot of anything, so let's go with it and see where it goes. I remain open on this, but I'm not sure. Not sure about this change. Anyway, next card. Speaking of the next card, so this is another Soviet card, and this is Workers Unite. And this might be that, I believe, I could be wrong, this is one of, if not the largest single cost changes we've seen. So Workers Unite was a 5-cost Soviet order that said discard your light infantry units. Discard is from hand. By the way, if you watch my previous video, I need to learn this. I do wish it said that, but anyway. Discard your light infantry units, should say from hand for me, it would just help, but I just think clear language is useful. But anyway, it says discard your light infantry units and gain a credit and draw a card for each. This on the face of it, like, you see what this is trying to do for. Light infantry, by the way, is a 1/1 1-op cost infantry, or 0-op cost rather, infantry without blitz that is generated by Soviet cards. There are Soviet orders that create light infantry, and it creates its own archetype, which was called tokens, and we might see a little bit of back now, and we'll talk about why in a minute. Workers Unite never saw any great amount of play, because at 5 credits, you need to be pitching a lot of light infantry for it actually to be worth the effort. in any way, shape or form. Hi, honey. My wife is saying hi while I'm recording this and making faces at the window because she's the most helpful human being in the world. But I'm not cutting it out because that's part of streamer life and I love my wife. So, what I will say is, the point I'm trying to make is that 5 cost, Workers Unite was never really going to see play. It's too expensive to be worth it. But the new version's cracked. This is 2 cost. It's 2. This is so good. I don't know whether it's good yet. It might, because its tokens took such a battering in the last balance changes that I don't know whether this is enough to help it, because it lost No Surrender, which was a big hit, and Baron of Ichi got changed, but this is so good. As an engine, as a credit generation, this is so good. This is such good value. It's very cool. This is such an interesting thing to do. I'm really fascinated. I'm looking forward to playing around with this when it comes out, because I think there's got to be some cracked stuff you can do with this, because at 2 cost, this is insanely good. It's bonkers. At 2 cost, this thing is just nuts. I could be proved wrong, but this is nuts. It's so cheap. But anyway, I'm pro this, by the way. Buffs to the Soviets, I'm all for it. And, you know, why not go ham on buffs in this patch? Because Lord knows they need some help. But, wow, big change. Right, next one. Alright, so Japan. This is a Japanese order. This is Shock Attack. Okay, so Shock Attack was a 3 cost order. It's a standard card, you can run 4 of them, and it says when a friendly unit loses smokescreen this turn, it gains +2/+2. This card is designed to go into a smokescreen archetype, and it is very apparent that we want to see smokescreen being a thing. I've talked about this with one of the cards that we saw in the returning and changes from the reserves. And my expectation that this is a sign that we're probably going to see some more support for this as an archetype in the next release. But anyway, they decided that Shock Attack wasn't seeing much play, and they're probably right, and they've now reduced this to 2 cost. This is really quite good. If you can find a way to proc this is really good. 2 cost to get +2/+2 on 1 unit's not bad. It's a decent value. If you can proc this on 2 units at once, if you've got 4 credits and you can proc this on 2 smokescreen units, this is really strong. I like this. I like that we're pushing in the direction of a new archetype. I love to see that. I would like to see smokescreen be fun and interesting. Who knows, we might see Aichi see play. Because, you know, a couple of Aichi getting this, it's not bad. Anyway, there's definitely room to see this being interesting. I like this as a change. I've got no complaints about this. I've got no passionate feelings beyond the fact that I think it's cool that we're headed in the direction of let's try and get into a new archetype, and that's always positive. Anyway, so that's my view on this. Perfectly good change. On to the next one. Empire of the Sun. Okay, I'm doing a lot of promotion at the moment, incidentally and accidentally. And I noticed J King mentioned it in his video too, of the video that we did together, which is, I really do hope we're going to do another one at some point. I need to chat to him about whether we can find time to do it. This was good fun. But anyway, I'll put a link in the doobly-doo. We did a video together in which J King took me through the first ever OCC and had me basically snap meta evaluate, look at the cards that were available and try and figure out what was played and what wasn't and what was good and what was... This card was very contentious because this card baffled me. Empire of the Sun, which I am reliably informed used to be called Empire of the Fun, was a 10 cost Japanese order that says destroy an enemy unit and draw cards equal to its attack. It's a special, and hypothetically it can get you some good draw, but kids, it's 10 credits. It's very inefficient. Say that again, it's 10 credits. Go watch the video, you'll see a whole conversation between J. King and I on the question of what they were smoking to think this was a good draw engine. The best draw in the game, in fact, I believe was the quote. It was 9 cost back then, kind of a thing. Guess what? It's 9 cost again. I mean, I love this because there are going to be veteran players who I'm sure are just delighted to see this because, hey, it's back to its old form. Do I think this is going to see play? No. I mean, some people are probably going to play this just for nostalgia, but really? 9 credits, destroy a unit, draw cards equal to its attack. If you're that late in the game, I mean, it could save you, but if this is the thing that saves you, I will be surprised. Anyway, it's cool that it's back. And the art's funky, but alright, whatever. And definitely check out the video. Next. Okay, so we've arrived at France, and I need to control my joy for a minute, because this is a change that makes me very happy, and I'm going to talk about why. And I also think it's relevant to France in general, which I'll also talk about a bit. But let's start with what the change is. This is the what is this? This is the 12e Regiment. This is the 2 ERMT. I'm not going to try and do the French. I should, but I'm not going to. For those who don't know, I was raised to actually be able to speak French fluently, but I have brain damage and mental issues, which means that my French is not so good anymore, and it's kind of pointless. But when I see this, out of habit, I want to read it in French, but I'm not going to. Anyway, the 2 ERMT, this is was a 7 cost, 2 op cost, 3/9 guard as a special. That, granted, did say at the start of your turn, each non-French unit you control gets +1/+1, but this is such a point. This card is bicycles, folks. It's not that the effect is bad, to be clear. In principle, the actual text effect is really good. Rolling buffs are always strong, but it's 7 cost. It's so slow that it's not going to matter in any kind of deck that cares. The place where this card would see play, in my opinion, is actually US-France Frontline could do this. I'm going to talk about that in a minute because it's an archetype I personally like. But anyway, the change. Or I should say changes. So, I think, literally, barring the buff, every number on this card is changing. So, the card is now 5 cost, but 3 op cost. In return for which, it's lost a point of attack and 2 points of defense. So it is now a 5 cost, 3 op cost, 2/7 guard as a special, but the text remains the same. At the start of your turn, each non-French unit you control gets +1/+1. I love this card. This card is not as good as a straight bomb drop as Blitzkrieg, but this card, in my opinion, and I'm going to test this when it comes out because I've been playing around with it and doing okay with it without this card being valid, makes US-France Frontline a possibility. The 2 units that we gained from the last expansion, the Chasseurs, which is the unit that deploys and has blitz, and a target unit is pulled to the front line if possible, which can be used both offensively and defensively, along with the versatile 50-something, can't remember the name, but anyway, the French unit that you can deploy and you choose whether it's got blitz and +3 attack or guard and +3 defense, I think it is. Those 2 cards, plus this, really quite a cool package to add to a deck that wants to take the front line and bring things to the front line, but be able to leverage bodies which are not normally blitz capable. Add to that Compromise as a draw engine. Note, Compromise as a draw engine, not a mill engine. This is Compromise played for its base value, which is just gain a card and 3 HQ defense, which is perfectly good. And I think you're onto something that's good, and I intend to play around with this. I have been playing around with this. And it's okay, it's just not as good as US-Germany frontline. This might really help, because this gives it a big swing card, and if you're in control of the front line, this thing with 7 defense in the back line, sitting, causing the plinking back. This is quite hard to deal with. Anyway, I'm excited for this for the simple reason, and I said I would talk about why I think I'm excited for this for France in general, as well as nerfing Mill a little, though granted in my opinion not the way that I would have done it and possibly not enough. This is also promoting a different French use case. And I love that. I love that this is trying to push more and more to it, and please do more of this 1939. Do more of moving France into this, because I think it's cool. And if you ever want to talk to someone, I'm not going to talk about them on stream or anything like that, because that would be pointless, because then it's in the public domain, and I know all about, intellectual property and all that rubbish. Not that I would particularly bother you for it, but if you ever want to talk to anyone about ideas, please reach out, because I would love to see France reworked a bit, and I think there are some very cool things you can do with it, and I love this because it's pointing in the right direction. Anyway, I'm done enthusing. Time to move on to the next card. Okay, the next card is Stubborn Defense. I've also talked about this before, but again, I will talk about it a little bit more now that we see it again. By the way, if there is background noise, there's a lot going on, and I've had to adjust my recording rig. You will notice I'm standing up because there are some changes going on around the house and things are happening, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So if there are audio issues, I'll do my best to fix them, but if you can hear anything in the background, that'll be why. Anyway, Stubborn Defense. This is the Polish order, which was countermeasure. Doing it again, it's the Polish countermeasure there. 0 cost. When an enemy attacks your unit, give your unit +2 defense as a standard card. I've said before, this is pretty decent. It's very situational, and its biggest problem is it's Polish, because Poland is a very competitive ally. It has a lot of good cards. It's been around a while, and it's very competitive for slots that you want to include Polish cards for. But this card was pretty decent. The change, the buff, is it's now 0 cost countermeasure that says when an enemy attacks your unit, give your unit +1 defense, draw a card if your unit survives. I love this card. I look forward to playing this card. The reason is I like draw engines that are situational. Now, there is a downside to this. It's only +1 defense, so if your opponent bombs out and hits it with something that does one more attack than it has defense, this whiffs, and you've wasted a card. However, if this triggers, having a unit survive and drawing a card is very strong. And Poland has some pretty good tools for getting decent defense units, and Brit-Poland control, which is an archetype I think might see some play, is going to love this card as an engine for draw. Because it's a standard, this is good value. And because quite a lot of nations like ally nations to have some draw in them, because draw is one of those things that you need to find in this game. If you go and watch my video on how to build decks in this game, it's a very beginner's guide, but I do talk about the importance of draw. Anyway, I love this change. I think it's pretty cool. I look forward to playing around with it. And the more I read this second time over, I get more enthusiastic about this as a change. It still does have the same downside, though. It's a Polish card. And Poland is competitive. And that's it. That is all of it. That is all of the changes. It's all of the changes we've seen in the cards, all of the alterations we've seen, and my opinions on them. Overall, it's interesting, but as you have probably noticed, there are some things I'm happy about and some things I have issues with. As ever, if you want to talk about those issues or opinions, you can find me. You can find me on the Cards main Discord, you can find me on most everybody else's Discord, and down below you can join my Discord. I'm always open to having conversations, plus of course you can write in the comments or reach out to me on social media. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this, I hope you find it useful. Stay well, be good human beings, and I will catch you next time.